185 AD, a Christian scholar named Irenaeus wrote 5 massive books trying to refute a teaching that was spreading like wildfire through the early church. A teaching so dangerous, so blasphemous to institutional power, that he dedicated his entire life's work to stopping it. The teaching was this: the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, the one who demanded blood sacrifice, who commanded genocide, who declared, "I am a jealous God," was not the true God. He was the devil, or more precisely, the demiurge, the blind creator of the material prison. And the first Christians, the ones who learned directly from Jesus' inner circle, knew this. They taught it openly. They discussed it in the catacombs, until the church gained political power and made teaching this truth punishable by death. The texts describing this were burned. The teachers were executed. The entire historical record was scrubbed. But fragments survived, hidden in sealed jars in the Egyptian desert, preserved in marginalized communities who passed the knowledge in secret for 2,000 years. And when you read what the earliest Christians actually believed about Yahweh, when you understand why they called him the adversary, the archon, the false god, everything about the religious system you were raised in starts making horrifying sense. Tonight, the veil is ripped away. Tonight, you are going to learn what the first Christians discovered about Yahweh. You are going to learn why the Gnostic texts explicitly identify him as the demiurge and not the supreme God. And most importantly, you are going to learn how chosen ones recognize the difference between the true source and the being who claims to be God while operating in jealousy, violence, and control. If you already suspected Yahweh wasn't the true God, if you have felt this fracture in your soul since childhood, comment, "I always knew," right now. Let the record show you were awake before the revelation. Here's what you need to understand to see what the early Christians saw. First, we are going to look at who actually taught this. Not fringe heretics, but direct students of the apostles. Communities with lineage traceable to Jesus' inner circle. Because the church wants you to think this was a late corruption. It wasn't. This was the original teaching. Orthodoxy was the corruption that came later when Rome took control. Second, we are going to examine what the Gnostic texts actually say about Yahweh. Not interpretation, not theology. Direct quotes from the secret book of John, the Apocryphon of James, the testimony of truth. Texts that name him explicitly as the demiurge, describe his physical form, and explain why he is confused, jealous, and violent. You will see that the being described in these texts matches the being described in the Old Testament exactly. Same behavior, same claims, same blindness to anything beyond himself. And third, we are going to look at how chosen ones today recognize this truth not through study, but through direct knowing. Because once you understand what Yahweh actually is, his system stops working on you. The guilt stops landing. The fear stops controlling. And you recognize that the voice that has been demanding obedience, threatening punishment, and claiming to be the only God, that voice has been the adversary all along. And the true God, the one Jesus called Father, has been waiting in the silence for you to recognize the difference. Before we go into the historical evidence, I need you to check something. Because most chosen ones didn't discover this through research. They discovered it through recognition. Something in their DNA rejected the programming. Something in them always knew the Old Testament God felt wrong. And if you were watching this video, you have probably felt at least 3 of these 5 signs. Sign 1. The cruelty felt wrong, and you were told you were the problem. You sat in Sunday school and read about God commanding the Israelites to kill every man, woman, and child in Canaan. You read about God hardening Pharaoh's heart just so he could demonstrate his power through plagues manipulating free will to create suffering. You read about God demanding that Abraham kill his own son as a test of loyalty. And something in you recoiled. Not because you didn't understand the historical context, not because you were too soft for divine justice, but because you recognized cruelty. And when you expressed discomfort, what happened? You were gaslit. You were told you lacked faith. You were told that God's ways are higher than human understanding. You were told that questioning divine violence makes you prideful. But the discomfort never went away. It intensified. Why? That is not the enemy. That is Sophia's wild face saying, "You are free." And then there is the second face, Mary Magdalene. If Lilith is Sophia's wild refusal, Mary is Sophia's illuminated return. Not the prostitute, not the repentant sinner saved by Jesus. That story is a fabrication invented in 591 AD by Pope Gregory, who deliberately conflated 3 different women in the Bible into one and declared Mary Magdalene a whore with 0 scriptural basis. Why? Because they needed her to be broken. Because the real Mary Magdalene wasn't broken. She was awakened. In the Gospel of Mary, one of the texts the church tried to burn, Mary teaches the disciples after Jesus is gone, and they are confused. They are afraid. They do not understand the higher mysteries Jesus showed them, but Mary does. She stands up and says, "Do not weep, do not grieve. His grace will be with you and protect you." Your intuition was detecting a frequency mismatch that theology tried to hide. Sign 3. You questioned why God would need blood sacrifice. The entire Old Testament system revolves around blood. Animal sacrifice for atonement, the scapegoat carrying sins into the wilderness, the Passover lamb's blood on doorposts. And then Christianity claims Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice, God sacrificing himself to appease his own wrath. And something in you thought, why? Why would an infinite loving God need blood? Why would forgiveness require death? Why does this system look identical to pagan appeasement of angry deities? You were told it is a mystery, that the cross is central to faith. But the question lingered because your spark recognized that blood magic is the domain of the demiurge, not the monad. The true God does not demand sacrifice. Only a false God feeding on suffering requires it. Sign 4. I am a jealous God felt like a confession, not a virtue. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 5, Yahweh declares his jealousy explicitly. The church teaches this as righteous. God deserves exclusive worship, therefore jealousy is appropriate. But you felt the cognitive dissonance, because jealousy is a lack. It is insecurity. It is the feeling that you might lose something, which means you are not complete in yourself. An infinite God, the source of all existence, cannot lack anything, cannot be threatened by other gods, cannot be insecure. So when Yahweh declares, I am jealous, what is he actually confessing? He is confessing that he is not infinite. He is confessing that he is aware of other powers. He is confessing that he is defending his territory because his position is precarious. The true God does not need to threaten you away from other gods. The demiurge does, because he knows he is not the only power. He is just the loudest one in this realm. Sign 5. You felt guilty for existing, and you couldn't locate the source. Not guilt for specific wrongs you had done. Existential guilt. The sense that your very being is somehow problematic. that you were born broken, that you need to be fixed, saved, redeemed from a stain you inherited just by taking a breath. This is the core of Yahweh's system, original sin. You are guilty before you have done anything. You need His salvation before you have committed any transgression. And if you ever felt that and thought, this doesn't make sense, why would a loving God create me broken? Your spark was recognizing the truth. The true God does not create broken things. The demiurge does. He creates beings in lack so they will depend on Him. He creates guilt so He can offer salvation. It is a trap, and chosen ones feel it as a trap long before they can articulate why. If you recognized yourself in even two of these signs, what you are about to learn isn't going to shock you. It is going to confirm what you already knew but didn't have language for yet. Here is why the church spent 2,000 years trying to erase this teaching. If Yahweh is the demiurge and not the supreme God, then the entire structure of institutional Christianity collapses. Because Christianity, as it was formulated by Rome, claims continuity with the Old Testament. They claim Jesus came to fulfill the law, not abolish it. They claim the Father Jesus spoke of is the same God who spoke to Moses from the burning bush. But if that is a lie, if Jesus was actually revealing a different God and exposing Yahweh as a false authority, then the religion that controls the world is built on a case of mistaken identity. The clearest evidence comes from the secret book of John, also called the Apocryphon of John. This text was written in the 2nd century and claims to record a vision John the Apostle received from the risen Christ. In it, Jesus describes the structure of reality, how the true God, the monad, emanated divine beings called aeons, and how one of these eons, Sophia, wisdom, created without her consort and gave birth to a distorted being called Yaldabaoth. Here is the direct quote from the hidden text. Listen closely to the description. And when she saw the consequence of her desire, it changed into a form of a lion-faced serpent, and his eyes were like lightning fires which flash. She cast him away from her, outside that place, so that no one of the immortal ones might see him, for she had created him in ignorance. She surrounded him with a luminous cloud, and she placed a throne in the middle of the cloud, and she called his name Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth. Not Yahweh spelled out, but the pattern is unmistakable. And then the text describes what he does. This is the first archon who took a great power from his mother, and he removed himself from her and moved away from the places where he was born. He became strong and created for himself others with a flame of luminous fire, which still exists now. And he joined with his arrogance, which is in him, and begot authorities for himself. He creates authorities, the archons. He does not perceive anything beyond himself. And then comes the key line, the smoking gun. And when he saw creation surrounding him and the multitude of angels around him which had come forth from him, he said to them, I am a jealous God, and there is no other God beside me. There it is, word for word, Exodus 20, verse 5. I am a jealous God. But in the Gnostic text, this isn't a declaration of rightful authority. It is a confession of ignorance. He says, there is no other God because he is blind. He literally cannot see the realms of light above him. He cannot perceive the monad or the pleroma. So he looks around at what he has created, matter, the archons, this dense realm, and he genuinely believes he is the only God. His jealousy isn't righteousness, it is madness. It is the delusion of a localized deity who thinks he is the infinite. And his demand for exclusive worship isn't because he deserves it. It is because he is terrified you will discover what is beyond him. The text continues. Yaldabaoth creates humanity, but he cannot animate the body. It is lifeless. So Sophia, in an act of redemption, tricks Yaldabaoth into breathing his power into the human. She breathes the divine spark, the new man, to certain humans, the pneumatics, the chosen ones. And from that moment, Yaldabaoth's goal becomes trapping those sparks, keeping them ignorant, making them worship him. Because if they remember what they are, fragments of light from beyond his realm, they will escape his system. And that is exactly what the Old Testament describes. A God obsessed with obedience, threatened by knowledge. The serpent offering gnosis in Eden, and God punishing Adam and Eve for wanting to be like gods. This is Yaldabaoth. This is the demiurge protecting his farm. And the early Christians who read these texts and then read the Old Testament said, they are describing the same being. Another early text, the Testimony of Truth, is even more explicit. It inverts the Eden story. It says the serpent was not the deceiver. The serpent was Sophia offering knowledge to humanity, and Yahweh was the liar. Quote, what sort is he then, this God? First, he envied Adam that he should eat from the tree of knowledge, and secondly, he said, Adam, where are you? And God does not have foreknowledge? Since he did not know this from the beginning, why did he say later, where are you? Unless he was foolish. The text is calling Yahweh foolish, limited, not omniscient, a pretender claiming abilities he doesn't possess. These weren't obscure heretics writing this. The Apocryphon of John was found in multiple copies in the Nag Hammadi library, suggesting wide circulation. The communities preserving these texts claimed apostolic succession. They traced their teaching to disciples who knew Jesus directly, and they taught openly. Jesus came to reveal the true Father above Yaldabaoth, and to expose the Old Testament God as the architect of this prison. You have been serving the wrong God from the beginning. Every appeal to Old Testament law, every claim of Abrahamic continuity, every use of divine wrath to control behavior, all of it serves the demiurge, not the true Father. And the early Christians who learned directly from Jesus knew this, which is why the texts that preserved their teaching had to be destroyed. You do not need a PhD in Gnostic studies to recognize this truth, because the difference between the demiurge and the monad isn't intellectual. It is experiential. When you have touched the presence of the true God, even briefly, Yahweh's energy becomes immediately recognizable as something else. And here is how chosen ones know the difference in direct experience. The true God, the monad, the infinite source, Jesus called Abydos, not speak in commands. It does not threaten. It does not demand. When you touch that presence, what you feel is unconditional love without agenda. It doesn't need anything from you. It isn't jealous of where your attention goes because it is the totality of what is. There is no fear in its presence, only recognition. The sense of, I know this. I have always known this. This is home. And when you return to ordinary consciousness, you don't feel guilt about your limitations. You feel compassion for yourself as a localized expression of the infinite trying to navigate temporary density. Here is the tragic irony. The church that claims to follow Jesus chose to serve the God Jesus came to expose. Because when Rome adopted Christianity in the 4th century, they needed a religion that supported imperial power. And Yahweh's system does that perfectly. Hierarchy, obedience to authority, divine sanction for violence against enemies. The God who commands genocide is very useful to an empire. The God Jesus revealed, the one who says, love your enemies. The kingdom is within you. You are the light of the world. That God undermines empire. That God makes people ungovernable. So the Gnostic texts that preserved Jesus' actual teaching were declared heresy. The communities teaching direct knowledge were massacred, and Christianity became Yahweh worship with Jesus' name pasted over it. The religion that killed Jesus won, and for 2,000 years it has been calling itself by his name. But the teaching survived, because truth does not die. It waits, and chosen ones throughout every generation have recognized it, sometimes through texts, sometimes through direct gnosis. And now, you know it. Yahweh is the demiurge. The early Christians knew. The church erased it. And you have just remembered what they tried to make you forget. Now that you know Yahweh is the demiurge and not the true God, your entire relationship with spiritual authority changes. You are not rejecting God. You are recognizing which God is real. And when you withdraw your faith, your fear, and your obedience from Yaldabaoth's system, something in you settles. The background anxiety that has been running your whole life just stops. Because you are not waiting for approval from the jealous God anymore. You are recognizing yourself as an expression of the infinite. And that recognition is what Jesus actually taught, not salvation through belief, liberation through gnosis. But understanding this creates a question. If Yahweh's system has been controlling humanity through religion for thousands of years, what is the structure of that control? How exactly do the archons keep the chosen ones trapped? In the next video, I reveal the archon hierarchy, the 7 rulers under Yaldabaoth, what each one governs, and how to recognize their influence in your daily life. Because once you see the system, you cannot be controlled by it anymore. If you have recognized Yahweh as the demiurge, do 3 things right now. First, comment, "I always knew," below. Let other chosen ones know they are not alone in this recognition. Second, subscribe to Divine Codes, because the next video exposes the 7 archons under Yaldabaoth, their names, their domains, and how they control humanity through religion, government, and thought. Third, like this video so the algorithm shows this to other chosen ones before it is suppressed. The church tried to erase this teaching once. They will try again. Share it while it is visible. Do all 3 now, and when you pray tonight, if you still pray, don't pray to Yahweh. Pray to the true Father, the one Jesus revealed, the one who doesn't demand, the one who doesn't threaten, the one who doesn't need your fear, the one who has been waiting in silence for you to recognize you were never separate. That is the real God.